Hello out there, and welcome to the No Shit Cast. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. Exciting show tonight, folks. Very exciting show tonight. I've got a for-real scientist on the show, believe it or not. This little quirky podcast of mine. She's a good friend of mine. Name's Heather Allardice. She's a scientist, neuroscientist, correct?
Yeah.
And she's decided to come on. I asked her to come on the show. We were actually having a conversation on Facebook, or I can't even remember. How did it happen? Some pseudoscience bull crap thing up on Facebook, and I think I saw your comment on it or something like that. And then I shot you a message and was like, "Man, you got to come on the show and talk about pseudoscience." And then you hit me back and was like, "Hey, can I come on and talk about this study that I'm working on or I've worked on?" And I think the answer was some sort of unnecessary expletive yes, right? So, kind of give us a rundown here. Obviously, like I said, you're moving towards your PhD in neuroscience, but give us kind of the history of what got you into this field and of study, and then certainly I want to hear about what you're working on currently.
Well, so like my path is pretty untraditional, right? Because I'm old for a PhD candidate. I'm 41, right? So that's pretty old. And part of that's because I had my family and worked as a high school biology and physics teacher before transitioning into getting my PhD. So I always wanted to do that. I always wanted to be able to actually design and carry out experiments. And I always wanted to work exploring the neural mechanisms or the underpinnings of behavior. So, why do we do the things we do? Because people are really fucking bad at knowing why they do what they do.
Is that a scientific term?
Yeah, like just really bad at it, right? So like even, and there's been experiments where they have conditioned, human undergraduate students to like carry out a specific action in response to a tone. And they'll do the action and you'll say to the undergraduate, well, why did you do that? And they won't know, right? So they don't even, we really don't have a good understanding of why we engage in the behaviors we engage in. And because of that, it makes it really hard to treat mental illness, right? So, or even to just overcome, personal behavioral obstacles. So I always wanted to know, like, why do we do what we do? And, how does our brain process and make those behaviors happen? I finally had an opportunity to get my PhD, and it really wasn't easy. I had to, really kind of beg my way in because of my non-traditional situation. And the woman I work for, she has a grant to study endocrine disruptors and behavior. So endocrine disruptors are anything that disrupt your endocrine system, which makes sense, which is your hormone system. And it turns out that we're really exposed to a lot of endocrine disruptors in our day-to-day life. And the big one that we study is bisphenol A. So bisphenol A is what makes plastic hard, right? Plastic's kind of vinyl and soft. And so you have to put something in it to make it hard for uses like water bottles or baby bottles and things like that.
Right.
And so it turns out that bisphenol A is actually a really pretty serious endocrine disruptor. And it has been linked to all kinds of bad behaviors like ADHD and externalizing in girls, which is like acting out aggressively in girls, internalizing in boys, so increased depression and things like that in boys, and this is in humans, just a lot of nasty behavioral outcomes. Some people think it might be related to the uptick in autism, and recently in the last 10 years people started to ask maybe it plays a role in making drug addiction harder to treat or easier to become addicted to drugs.
Is that okay? So it's So it's not vaccines, is what you're basically saying, then, right?
Yeah, not vaccines, man. Like, not vaccines. Uh, yeah. It's such a bizarre assumption, and the paper that all anti-vaxxers predicate their opinion on actually was redacted, and that doctor was disbarred. And even just, I can't even believe the study got published. Like, I want 20 people or something, which is like ridiculous. But
Yeah, it was a real small sample group, right? Like
oh
extremely
God,
small to make
ridiculous.
those kind of
Yeah,
blanket
ridiculous.
statements.
And it turned out he'd actually doctored the data too. So like just all bad, like everything was bad.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is an example of sometimes how science can kind of capture people's imaginations, and if they don't have the educational background to question it, they get misinformed.
Yeah.
And once somebody's really misinformed, it's very difficult to persuade them that they're wrong.
That's Mark Twain, right? It's easier to fool somebody than to convince them that they've been fooled.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of sociological studies about that, trying to correct people when they're wrong using facts, and it just does not work.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
And I think that when we talk about science education in general, people want this or that to be taught, but fundamentally the point of a science education in high school and in elementary school, and even to some degree, as an undergraduate in college, is to teach you how to be a good critical thinker. And that should be the emphasis, because surely anybody who was a good critical thinker would start to ask themselves if it really makes sense that vaccines cause autism.
Yeah, right.
Like that logically, there's some real logic flaws there that don't make any sense.
Now, do you think that that was something that was a personality trait for you growing up, and then that you were always kind of critical or always kind of pick things apart logically? Was that like something that you were always that way?
Yeah. So I think, I am genetically predisposed to be logical, right? But also, I had a really difficult upbringing, and that shaped it too, right? So like I could look around at the people who are raising me and compartmentalize and be like, no, this isn't my problem, this is their problem.
Yep.
And many times the things they said logically didn't make any sense, and so I was able to kind of critically evaluate that stuff. And it is interesting. One of my other cousins, who was able to do that too, survived the childhood and is normal, and she's actually a biology teacher. But then one of my cousins was not able to survive that upbringing, and he hung himself. And my other cousin is a heroin addict. So I think there's a genetic predisposition to view things logically that was then reinforced by how I grew up. So I think it's both. There is no, nature and nurture are not at odds with each other. There's only the ways that nature influences and nurture, and vice versa. So, yeah. And it's surprising to me when I meet people, and in fact, there's that meme on Facebook, right, about how you never, you want to go back to the days when you didn't know how stupid everybody was.
Right.
And I really feel that way, because I guess, my bad in being in my bubble, shame on me. I just assumed that if you just presented a logical argument to somebody, that even if they didn't agree with you in the end, at the very least, they would see the validity of the argument that you presented, and have to start to think about their own argument and present their own argument in the same way. And that's not a thing.
No, not even a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I'm on my own, because of that, I'm sort of on my own personal social media crusade to just start shunning people that are just ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not going to subscribe to your BS, when it gets that crazy, but nonetheless. So, okay. So that, so you're saying that kind of, was what fomented your desire to continue on. And obviously it was profound because you're, like you said, you're seeking your PhD here,
Yeah.
at 41 years old. So this has been something that's been very present for you, even throughout your adult life. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The idea that there's a good method in place for asking questions and figuring stuff out, knowing shit, right? Like there's a good way to know shit,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
a better way than just guessing and kind of like that feels right. you know uh
Yep. Yeah,
which seems
it's so contrary too, is it not? That like the first time in recent in my entire life was just recently where I heard someone tell me that they had alternative facts, and I like that's like dividing by zero. I don't even know. I don't even know where to begin with that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like, there are some. It's not uncommon for any of us to have a subjective opinion, but to hold it so deeply that we regard it as fact, and that happens, and it happens to all of us, right? There are things we hold to be fundamentally true for whatever reason, and you know and we're surprised when people challenge it or we learn it's not true. And so certainly there is some subjectivity, and I've heard people use the term alternate facts to describe something that is subjective to them. But then when I point out it's subjective, they get mad, like,
Right.
like like I pointed out that it's a logical fallacy to say that we need more laws to stop us from immigrants, but then to say that gun laws are ridiculous because laws don't stop crime,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or vice versa. Like, you can't make those two arguments together. It's a logical fallacy. If one is true, then the other is inherently false.
Right.
Uh,
Well, that's the what do they call that? Schrodinger's immigrant is a good example of that.
right,
Is somebody that's both taking all the jobs while simultaneously gobbling up all the benefits.
right.
So it's like, wait, how does that even work, right?
Yeah, like, so, I'm not saying, and ultimately I tried to point out that it comes down to subjectivity. Like, if you are very liberal, you might say something like, even one school shooting, even one death or one injury by a gun is too much,
Right.
we need to have all these strong laws. And then you've got the conservative who's like, no, 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 like, you're infringing on my rights. But then on the other hand, the conservative will say, if that stupid, ineffective wall stops one immigrant from hurting an American, it will have done its job, right?
Yep.
Those are totally subjective opinions, and it's not my place to challenge your opinion about this. But, I will double down and triple down and quadruple down on your ridiculous logical flaw that you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of this comes from. I watched this fascinating lecture one time on the dangers of things like zero tolerance policies.
Yeah.
Because it's better to accept that there is some, inefficiency in the system and build your system around that than it is to try to remove, because the cost justification goes up exponentially. So you reach a point of well, we've seen it in the drug war. There's no amount of money that can't be spent for that. However, the impact per dollar is so much less now because of that. It's you sort of run to the, like I said, you run into the point of diminishing returns, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough because a lot of people don't understand. They don't look at things pragmatically that way at all. Okay.
Right.
They don't get that. But eventually the system will run out of resources so you're just better off and I think that's more a way that someone with a science background or a scientific background would look at things more pragmatically that way. Which is a little scary when you consider. I think there's only one scientist in elected office in federal office in the entirety of government right now.
Yeah, yeah, and it's challenging, right? Because even of course there is diminishing returns with things whenever you're going to try to move towards a zero outcome, like you said, there's always going to be diminishing returns. But for me, even more frustrating for that is the hypocrisy that people exhibit when they hold an opinion where they want zero returns in this topic, but don't. But
yes,
certain zero returns are not possible in another topic.
Yeah, they'll completely accept the fallacy of that logic in one instance, but will somehow through machinations will justify it in another subject that they. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it doesn't work, period. Let's start there.
Right. You know, and it's really frustrating, you know, like I don't understand. Like when, of course there are times when I make mistakes, and you've pointed out times when my logic hasn't been good, and I really appreciate that. And Derek Albee is another person who does that, and
it's done with love, I assure you.
And I like it, you know, because like, if I have a logical error in something that I want somebody to tell me, or, you know, or at the very least, I want somebody
same
to
way.
tell,
Yep.
you know, because that's how you grow as a thinker, you know, but I'm learning pretty hard that that's not how people feel in general. Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I mean, I love having some sort of, something in my mind that I believe proven to me just that it's false. I love that. Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to be wrong.
Right.
And I mean, I don't want to be factually wrong. I don't mind someone pointing out when I'm factually wrong, because then I can fix that. You know what I mean? But I think that comes a lot from when you work in a technical or engineering type or scientific type field. That is part of your reputation. You follow me? So you want to find those kind of things and get rid of them real quick, because that's something that could pop up later. And I kid you not, okay, I'm not going to name names, but a fairly large company that makes forgings, I seen this happen, okay? They were having a meeting about a furnace where the furnace heated the product up inside a vacuum, okay? And there was an engineer in there that asked the question, how are you guys going to handle these pieces of material floating around inside this furnace once you pull a vacuum?
He thought the vacuum meant there was no gravity.
No gravity. And it was stunning, Heather. This room of, I mean, these are all, you know, they build machines for a living. This is engineers, metallurgists, scientists, like of this ilk, right? And watching everybody in this room just turn and look at this person like, did you really just ask that question out loud with 20, you know, it was stunning. And that's the kind of things, you know, when I saw that happen, I was like, I never want to be that person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I never want to make, I don't know how that person even got there, to be honest with you, because this is somebody that has a degree.
Yeah.
Okay. In engineering. And I don't want to go any further than that on the poor person, but and I've seen things like that, you know. So I want to know the facts of something so that I don't become that person, right? But now social media makes that person popular,
right? Yeah, it's weird, and I guess probably like that's always been there, right? People finding their echo chambers even before social media. But I guess my echo chamber must have not had a lot of stupid people in it. You know, I don't know. Like or maybe those people feel more like it's more comfortable challenging with their stupidity in a social media format. And it's hard, right? Because I guess I really shouldn't even say stupidity. I should say ignorance, right? Because, you know, I don't believe that, like,
oh no, I'm going to challenge you on that, because I used to be the same way. I used to think that I used to believe that too. I used to think, okay, you know what? It's just a lack of information. And if that were the case, then when presented with quality information, then the opinion would change. However, I have not seen any evidence that that happens. So I don't no longer believe those people are ignorant. I believe they're fucking stupid. I really do. I believe there are a shit ton of really stupid people in this world that have way more influence than they should probably have.
Yeah, like willfully stupid, right? And I
Oh my God, yes.
it's challenging, and I want to believe the best in people, and Chris said, he's like, dude, he's like, you're such a nice person, he said, but if I only knew you from social media, he's like, I would not like you. And I said, yeah, I got to try to change the spin on that. But like, it was like, and I don't necessarily want to get political. I'm sure you have listeners who love Trump and listeners who hate Trump, but something about the election seemed to really empower people who were ignorant, to really push back on people who are not. So
I don't think I don't think that that's a partisan statement in any way.
yeah,
Okay, because I don't think it just, I mean, it didn't just happen. You're right. It happened but it did. It happened across the board. People lost their ability for objectivity. It was crazy.
Yeah, and I think I would be remiss to say that I maintained my objectivity right after the election. I didn't. I was horrified by the duplicity of people.
Yeah.
And like
Hypocrisy is a good
yeah,
word too.
yeah.
Yep.
I mean, like I knew people who supported Trump, and I was like, yeah, that tracks, man. You're rich, you don't have kids. Like, if I were you, I'd support him too. Like, yeah, like you'd be stupid not to vote for Trump. And but it was the people who are like, I support LGBT, I support science, I support this, but I just couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton. And I was like, no, man, then you don't support any of those things you just said. Like, be real about it. You know what I mean? Be real.
Well, it's a travesty, Heather. I agree 100%. And I also would add, how the hell did we end up with these two people as the candidates?
Yeah.
To begin with,
Yeah.
It's nuts. That's that. Oh my God. I don't know that you could come up with two worse. Ugh.
And on the other end, there's the people who idolize Hillary Clinton, right? Like, let's not minimize the fact that she lost to Trump. Like, like something. Obviously, she wasn't the ideal candidate,
right?
And I mean, there is never a perfect candidate who wins or loses, and the horrible candidate who wins or loses. Like, be real. She was inherently unlikable. She had made the Clintons were basically Republicans, so all these Democrats are like, oh, she was best, she was this. Yeah, was she better than Trump? I feel like she was, undoubtedly, but is she the beacon of democratic and liberal values that liberals want to say she is now? No.
more, yeah, the same hypocrisy. It was like, I liken it all to, and actually I think we just talked about this when I was talking with my buddy Kenny yesterday. It's like a team sports thing, okay, where all of a sudden your team winning, and you forget the fact that we're all still on Team Human, right? Like, what happened to that? That's sort of missing, or we're all on team, we got to live in this country together kind of thing, That is gone. It's just about your team or your side getting up on the other team or the other side. And I don't know where we as a society win in that kind of environment. I don't see it.
No, nobody wins. And one of the overarching trend that's happening, not just in America, but all over the world, is an insurgence of nationalism. And of course, nationalism historically is the pathway to fascism, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's how fascists come to power. And that's not me making a partisan statement or accusing Trump particularly of fascism.
That's just history.
That's just history. That's how fascists come to power. And there's a lot of history that you can just read about that demonstrates that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not, I'm not a sociologist, but I'm sure that if you looked at what causes a surge in nationalism,
right,
you'd find it has to do with outer groups coming in, or perceived outer groups, right? There's been a lot of displacement of people, and other countries, and they're moving not just into America but also into Europe, into England, and places like that. And it's causing, this opportunity for nationalists to scapegoat and to build an us or them mentality. And I think in a lot of countries, many of us who are socially liberal, so like maybe, we're deficit hawks, but we still think gay people should be able to get married, right?
Right.
We kind of were just like, well, nationalism can't touch us, right? Because surely not everybody most people in America are pretty chill and pretty socially liberal. We just want to make sure we all have jobs, right?
Right.
And so it's very shocking, I think, and I think for a long time, the far, not Republicans, right? Because Republicans, in my mind, are people who are like, hey, don't incur a lot of money in the deficit, like fiscal conservatives,
But yeah,
But
there's definitely a difference between a Republican and a conservative today. They're not the
yeah,
same thing anymore. You
yeah,
can't make them
yeah,
the same thing anymore.
they're not. So like the very far, far right, right? The very far, far right for a long time has been trying to position things so like they were already playing a zero sum game, and the left, particularly the far left, got super complacent and just was like, yeah, we're right, so everybody's always going to agree with us all the time. And so now we're at this place where we have a government who is being controlled by a very small subset of the population, um, who represents this far right wing, and instead of the left reaching over and being like, look, no, like, you're right, we shouldn't raise the deficit $16 billion, and
Right.
no, you're totally right, we shouldn't come into your home and take your firearm because because of whatever.
Yep.
Let's just preserve people's right to enter into a contract as adults, and things like that.
Right.
The left has done exactly what the right hoped they did, and just played it like, us against them. And that's exactly what nationalism needs, right? They need a bad guy.
Yes.
um
Yes.
it pushes people who who don't like the way things are going, but who have been lifelong conservative, and I mean that in the good sense, lifelong Republicans, to feel like they have no choice but to back their team, so to speak, and it's too bad,
Yeah. Yeah, I think another appropriate word would be jingoism too. I think that a lot of this is almost starting to turn into its own sort of weird religion. And
Yeah,
again, I'm not saying that partisanly. I'm saying
yeah,
that, wow, time to slow the frick down here, people, and start looking at things a little more objectively, because this is getting out of hand.
yeah. I mean, like, you know, it. I I miss George W. Bush, right? Like, he was not a good president, and there were people on the left who were calling for him to be, charged with war crimes and things like that. But overall, we were like, as a country, I think we're like, we're gonna get through this, maybe we don't love him, but we're gonna get through it, and but this feels very different to me. This feels like, in a lot of ways, I feel like if you can't be honest about the fact that you're voting for nationalism, and that or if you are like putting forth candidates on the left, that are in their own way radicalized, then I don't think that you're doing what needs to be done, and I, because I do love logic, right? So I hate hypocrisy in any form. So like, if somebody on the left who posts bad science and like posts memes about, climate change is real, get woke, but then their next meme is about how like they're gonna heal their cancer with pot,
Yeah. Yep.
I'm as all over that as I am, if somebody starts praising Mitch McConnell, for stopping the nomination when Obama was president, but now they're on the Democrats. I'm like, no, man, no.
It sort of sucks, right? I mean, to your point, Neil deGrasse. I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson in an interview talking about how, there, because you equally have the science denial on both sides of the political spectrum.
Oh yeah.
And historically speaking, the science and community, I think, always sort of found its home more on in the liberal side of that spectrum than it did necessarily in the conservative side of that spectrum, because conservatives don't like to pay for things like the mating habits of barn swallows and shit like that, right? They don't. Yeah. Okay, so but now there's this weird sort of under group inside even liberalism that's anti-vaccinations, and then you got these groups like Goop, and got people doing horrific things to themselves, like all of this there's all this junk pseudoscience that's floating around out there, and it's got a very prominent home on the left. So the science community sort of finds itself almost without a home in a lot of ways. Ideologically, it's sort of become in a way like the whipping post for certain factions of both sides now.
Yeah. Well, most scientists tend to be left or central leaning. Most of life science scientists tend to be left or central leaning. Most engineers and mathematicians and physicists in some ways are more likely to be a little bit more right to center.
Yep, guilty. Yep.
So, but I think both the left and the right, have this whole my opinion is as good as your fact thing going on, and I see this in science statements by both the left and the right. I mean, there is no doubt that climate change is happening. Like, we know it's happening. We know we're causing it. It's very well documented, and in like 99 out of 100 papers about climate science will support this view. But of course, in science isn't perfect. And we publish things, whether, if they're dissenting or if they're not dissenting, they get published.
Right.
So there are a handful of papers that state to the contrary, and you'll always find people on the right holding up that one paper that's like, in some obscure journal, done by Joe Schmo, it's not great, and they want to put it up against NASA's evidence and say, see this one guy, whatever.
Right.
Because they don't have a fundamental appreciation that it's evidence, right? So one piece, and it's not a murder trial, like one piece of evidence, one piece of doubt doesn't mean that the whole other body of evidence with all these replicatable studies is negative.
It gets thrown out. Yeah, right. Exactly.
And it's the same with the left and health, holistic medicine type stuff,
Yep.
And that's particularly frustrating for me because they're, especially on the left, they're always talking about, this is natural and that is natural and this is bad for you and that is bad for you. And truthfully, some things are bad for you. Bisphenol A is not good for you.
Right. Yeah, so you know what? Maybe this is you're the perfect person to do this, because I don't think a lot of people understand, Heather, how a conclusion is reached scientifically. Okay, how there's peer review and there's competing studies, and then you got to be able to duplicate the results and things like that. I think they think somebody just sits in a lab and has some magic shit happen, and they write a paper, and now that's fact. And that's not, right? That's not how this happens, right?
No, that's not how it happens. So now, right now in science, we're going in some sciences like psychology, they're going through what is called a crisis of replication, where studies that have been held as canon are not being able to be replicated. But psychology is a very tricky science, right? It's because you measure the behaviors in humans, and that always is tricky. But in many sciences, what happens is, before you even start your study, you read the available literature about the topic that you want to research. And you do this really thoroughly, because if you accidentally pick something somebody else has done before, and you duplicate that experiment exactly, and it's just a regurgitation of what somebody, or derivative of somebody else's work, then you might not be able to publish what you do, right? So what you do is you look at the available information,
right,
studies already done. So for example, in my case, the study I just did, I used a paradigm called a conditioned place preference paradigm, right? So this is a test that you do in mice, where you train them that you give them a drug and you put them in a specific box, and they make the association between the drug, which of course they like, and that box. And then you give them just saline and you put them in a different box. So then they learn that that box is not associated with the drug, right? So this is a test that's been replicated thousands and thousands and thousands of times.
Okay.
So the test is meaningful. We know what it means, and it's easily replicatable. So it wouldn't be useful for me to do a study to prove that conditioned place preference works, right? We know there's been thousands of studies that have used this paradigm. We know it works. So what I did was, I'll put in a twist. So I'll say, well, does gestational exposure to bisphenol A change the behavior within the confines of this test, right? So when somebody looks at studies and they say, well, this study found an effect and this study found no effect, and this, there's a lot of variation between the studies that in 99% of the cases accounts for why the results are different. So what you have to do when you're reading the evidence is you have to not just read and understand the point of the paper and the hypothesis and how it was tested, and then think about whether you agree with the conclusions of the researcher, but you have to ask yourself, if two studies say two different things, but they're studying the same thing, say the effect of bisphenol A on drug addiction, why they might have different results. So there's a lot of critical thinking that goes into the evaluation of the evidence. And it's not like we're just reading it and everybody's like, yeah, Joe said this, so it must be true, so this is what I'm going to say too. You're critically evaluating the evidence. And if you can imagine then that if you were getting the same result over and over, for example, or a lack of result in the instance of vaccines and autism, and you have dozens of people or hundreds of people actually in that case doing these studies, and they're making all these variations, and universally it's coming out that there's no correlation between vaccines and autism, but this one jackass over here on the has this one study with 20 people that's poorly done. You can imagine how ludicrous that seems to scientists when anti-vaxxers are holding up that one study, or climate deniers are holding up that one study against the weight of all this evidence.
Right.
It's really, and as you say, they're peer reviewed, right? So I just submitted a paper about BPA metabolism. That paper will be read by 4 people. Those people will send me back comments about, what I need to fix, what I need to change, what they don't like about it. And they may come back and they may say, I didn't like this study at all. I think it's too flawed to be published. We won't publish it.
Yep. Yeah, there's a check and balance process before the scientific community says yes, or something's true. There's a it isn't, like you said, it isn't just one jackass making a study and then publishing it out there so that a bunch of people that don't know what they're looking at or don't appreciate the process can find it on Google.
Right.
That's not research. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, and very frustrating to me, and I push back on this a lot online. I'll say, they'll say they did their research, and I'll say, well, did you use Google Scholar? Right? Because Google Scholar will pull up, and you may not be able to read them because, like, sometimes you hit paywalls and things like that,
right.
But
yep.
You'll be able to see the abstracts. So you could, instead of using Google, if people just used Google Scholar, they would actually pull up real science.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, because the right information is out there, and generally it's like you'll see that it's 90% of the information says X, and then 10% says Y, and that 10% is generally that salacious stuff or whatever that comes from crappy sources.
I mean, and a lot of times it's not even that. It's not even a 90 to a 10%, which is why climate denying on the right and the healthcare denying stuff on the left is so frustrating, because the evidence in those cases is really overwhelming.
Yep.
So, like when I do my research, right, and I'm looking for the effects of bisphenol, there's a lot of studies that show no effect, that use different, and it's because they use different strains of mice, or they use a different dosage, or they give it a different way. So I give mine through food. Maybe they give theirs through injection. So the evidence isn't even as cut and dried, right? So like, scientists are constantly faced with this, is the literature strong enough for me to really feel comfortable making these hypotheses based on this body of literature? But sometimes that doesn't happen, and in some of those cases, it's like climate change or vaccines, or things like gender identity, actually, and whether or not gender identity is the result of culture or genetics. Things like that have a lot of really strong evidence, and so when as a scientist you hear people saying they did their research and just arguing for ridiculousness, it's like, man, you didn't do your research. Like, you really didn't. And I can't tell you how many times I've had people who are like, and not that, like, and anybody can look up the research and read it, and I believe that anybody who has a IQ of 100 or more, or maybe even 90 or more, could definitely learn and train themselves to read scientific papers. But I can't tell you how many times lay people have said to me, well, I'm just educating you, and you should educate yourself.
Yeah, that's fun, isn't it?
And it's like, I don't know how I could better educate my
than what you're already doing. Right, than what you're already doing. Explain to me how I'm going to better educate myself there, Google Sally, right?
and again, it goes back to that serious inability to critically think. Like, logically, that statement makes no sense. Right? Like, if you told me to educate myself about engineering, I'd be like, oh shit, yeah, I gotta educate myself about engineering, because you're an engineer, right?
Yep.
But like, somebody to tell me that, like, about addiction, or about, even about science topics like vaccines, unless they are an immunologist, unless they are, or can present, the references for why they think they know better about this topic than me, for them to tell me to educate myself predicated on natural news, like,
oh my God,
that
yes,
doesn't make sense. Like, what you're saying is illogical.
It's a lot easier though, Heather, for engineers, or especially engineers like me, to be smug bastards, because when someone tells us we're wrong and we know we're right, all we got to do is go, okay, go ahead, try it. And when it doesn't work, or it fails spectacularly, it's like, ta-da, so, causality result kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people in the science community don't necessarily get that. They don't, because when they're, okay, if they go, well, just go ahead, then, shit tons of people die. And not that I don't have that in my field too. I would never let something go past the point where I thought it was dangerous. But a lot of the stuff I do is, timing related, and power source related, stuff like that, where it's just going to not work, kind of thing. But by, millions of people's lives, or the planet's lives, aren't at stake for that. If you just go, oh shit, go ahead. There's no, it doesn't bother me. I've heard this before, and I want to get your opinion on this too. I've heard this statement, and the statement is that, everybody in the science and engineering world at some level knows this, okay? That there's absolutely no major problem on this planet that we can't fix. There's no famine issue, there's no water issue, there's no power issue that we can't actually we already have the technology, we already have the solutions to fix these issues. The problem is that nobody will let us, okay? And I think that that's where, like with the climate issue, I think we're arguing about the wrong thing. And I'll tell you why. Putting aside the fact that digging up carbon out of the ground that's been sequestered there for millions of years, or hundreds of thousands of years, and then releasing it all at once into an environment that it takes thousands of years to put it back in the ground, and not assuming that there's going to be issues with doing that is just so asinine. I don't even want to have that discussion with people, right? Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, and this is a fact, for instance, just power. Let's say if we're just talking fossil fuels from the standpoint of power, and that's all, okay? It does a lot more than that, but let's just assume power, okay? We know beyond a shadow of a doubt now that as a society, our power consumption rate is far surpassing what we can produce with fossil fuels, period. Because we know that they're going to be finite. You're going to eventually run out of them. Okay. And that, unfortunately, really the only power source that has the density to handle future power production needs means we have to move into some form of safe, acceptable, stable nuclear power, period.
Yeah.
It also has the side effect of not digging carbon out of the ground and releasing it into the atmosphere. You see what I mean? So
I
like
do.
so like there and all of the problems we have, whether it's desalinization, purifying water, whatever it is, producing food,
Yeah.
okay? All of it is going to require power. That's the key, right? Because a system has a one-time cost and you're done.
Yeah.
Where all of the solutions start to fall apart is the cost per kilowatt for electricity, or the cost, per kilowatt for power, because it becomes you can't charge people enough to desalinize water enough,
Right.
or you got to put it in a country that's already so broke nobody's going to pay for it anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to solve this. We have to, this whole thing is, to me, is just completely the wrong argument. It's like, folks, time out. We've got to produce power, lots and lots of cheap, abundant power. And when we do that, a lot of these other problems will fix themselves, because then they become financially viable, but not until then. So how do you kind of feel about that? I mean, I've heard this statement and I've heard this argument placed this way. I mean, are you sort of in this camp that we can fix this shit if people would just let us?
Yeah. And I've actually made the argument. So I'm not a climate change scientist, and actually climate change science is one of the most complicated scientific fields, in my opinion. It's very difficult because it involves a lot of mathematical modeling. And so, you make the argument that the scientific evidence is saying that climate change is happening, right? And of course, that's not effective. People don't want to hear that, right? They don't want to look at the science, and I can appreciate that. It's challenging, it's boring. So then I tried to make the argument that you're making. Look, like, even if fossil fuels were, unicorn farts and daisies, like, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, it's finite.
It's the end. Like, you need something that's going to be sustainable. So what happens when you get to the end? And the most frequent argument against that, and a good friend of both of ours has made this argument, and no matter how much I point out to them that it's ridiculous, they continue to make it, and I've heard other people make it. They make the argument about jobs now, right? So, like, they have this bizarre nearsightedness, short-sightedness, where they make the argument somehow that if we invest in these sustainable power models and we put work into that it's going to take jobs away from coal miners, right? And I think we see that, spectacularly in when people cite it in their support of Trump, and it's bizarre, right? Because it doesn't take into consideration the fact that this kind of thing would create jobs, right? So,
absolutely. If you could cut the cost per kilowatt hour of electricity in the United States in half, you'd see an explosion of investment because the total cost of going to business would be reduced dramatically.
Right. So it's like a win-win, but there's a lot of, and I can't, my opinion about why things like this don't go forward is because I think that some lobbies are very strong still, and I think they muck it up. That I could be wrong about that. I'm not a social science, I'm not a political science person, but it seems to me like that should be a totally nonpartisan, let's invest in this and be the forerunner of this and make all this money for America. And why it doesn't get done, I don't really understand.
Well, I can tell you straight up, if you think that, because this is one of the things that fascinated me as a controls engineer, because some of the work that I did for power companies. And I mean like Chevron style, not them specifically. I don't mean to name them, but for like, oil and petroleum companies. But I was working in doing automation in solar panel manufacturing. Okay, so it's like, well, wait a minute. So these, if you look at all the oil companies and stuff are doing, is they're relabeling themselves as energy companies. Okay,
Yeah.
So that's what I'm getting at. These people would be spending the money to build the style of power plants that we wanted, or that would benefit us. Okay, and I'm talking, I know I don't want to go down in the weeds here, but like third and fourth gen nuke type stuff. Okay, the thorium salts, the real safe, stable stuff that can't melt down, doesn't have a high pressure stage. That's what I'm getting at. Scientists already solved a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
When people think nuclear power, for instance, they panic because they think 3 Mile Island or they think
Yeah.
Chernobyl. No,
Yeah.
folks, you don't even have to build reactors that way anymore. You don't
Yeah.
have to. There's a whole new set of science now
Yeah.
where you could go in much safer, much more modular, more distributed type power grid, which is more stable. Like there's a lot of benefits to doing this stuff. But these energy companies are not going to invest in that because no one would even give you the permit to build it as soon as they find out that it's on the nuclear scale
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
energy. That's
Yeah.
all that means. It doesn't necessarily mean, and they conflate that with, okay, nuclear means bomb or nuclear means
Yeah.
weapon. And no. It just
Yeah.
that's a scale of efficiency.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it circles back to the lack of like even a basic science understanding for the
Right.
majority of people.
Or even a critical thinking capacity, right? Because you would think, just on a critical thinking standpoint, if you were the people making legislative decisions about this, you'd say, okay, tell me about it.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Yeah.
tell me about it. And but it seems to me as though there's not even that happening, and then there's also kind of a, I think everyday average Americans, I think most just normal people have this idea that they want to leave a better life for their kids. Like that's like we're all kind of trying to leave things just a little better, a little easier for our kids, but that's a real disconnect with how we pass laws and how we legislate things, and we don't seem to make good critical thinking choices about
Yeah,
where
right.
things are going. This never ending nearsightedness, where policies get made that maybe are beneficial for this year and next year, but for 30 or 40 years down the line are not going to be beneficial and actually lay the groundwork, for things, for power
Yeah,
shortages,
right.
for energy shortages, and for, crippling deficits, or, just this concept, that like, even if you thought nuclear power was the devil or whatever, or because you didn't understand it, or even if you thought like your whole family mined coal and you were afraid about where you were going to get your next paycheck,
Right.
like, logically, don't you think it's worth our while to investigate something that would, leave the planet a little cleaner? Like, like, what is the why? How can anybody logically argue against that, right? Like, how can anybody logically argue against, leaving the world sustainable?
A
Like,
better place. Right. Yeah.
or just even maybe you don't even make it better, but just sustainable.
Yeah, just
Like,
don't screw it up any more than you already have, kind of thing,
yeah,
right? Don't do any more harm.
yeah, just but again, it's that lack of critical thinking skills, and this very nearsighted perspective, and this just inability to even really ask questions, and then, when people ask you questions about it, and they get defensive, like, if you just ask a question, well, tell me why you think that. Like, why do you even think that? And then
Right.
they mad, it makes them angry. Well, you can't even tell me why you think what you think. You can't even tell me why you think nuclear energy is bad. Why
Right.
why do you think it's bad? Why are you afraid of it?
Fukushima,
Yeah,
Chernobyl,
yeah,
3 Mile Island. What else do I need to tell you?
yeah.
Okay, well, that's apples and oranges.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So okay, but even if they like, and then if you challenge that idea that nuclear power is not the same as it was, and this is what it means, I just don't believe that you'd get any traction. I
No.
think they would be like, not worth it. It's that zero sum argument again, that fallacy of logic. Even one is too. We can't even take the risk of this or
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah, well,
Uh,
the first podcast I did was called "Mexicans Aren't Stealing Your Jobs, I Am."
yeah, yeah, really.
Okay, and in 2010, all of our publications were sort of making the predictions based on current market trends as to how many like production labor jobs were going to disappear based on the explosion of capability and the type of systems that I build. Okay,
Yeah,
so I mean this is happening. It's already happened. Okay,
yeah,
all we're waiting for is the life cycle of equipment to get phased out because all this new stuff's coming in. All right,
Yeah.
and I mean, we're doing stuff where in factories where we're going in and like relocating their equipment and combining, displays and controls where we're taking something that required 7 people to do it, and now it takes one.
Right.
And all of these steel mills and stuff that I've been walking into for years, you walk into these steel mills. There was a point in time, and I'm not going to name names, but there was a mill here in Ohio where at one point in time there was like 15,000 people that worked there. There's like 600 now.
Yeah.
And then the mill's still running. Okay, it doesn't. Now, don't get me wrong; they don't run these places at 100% capacity. But even if they were, you're not going to get. I mean, they're running at 30% capacity. So even if they hired everybody back and everything was this utopian world and they fired these plants back up, you're not getting 1,500, 15. You're getting a third or less of those type of jobs, and that's going to continue to actually shrink. So that was always you were having this argument, for instance, about immigration. And I'm standing over here going, you guys don't understand. There's not even going to be any jobs for the immigrants to do. Like, this is a problem. We're not addressing, what do we do when a workforce is 40% of a workforce has been displaced in 5 years? Yeah. Because you can't just look at those people and go, you get all bootstrappy, it's time to pull yourself up because you have no skill to compete in the modern world. What do we do with them? Do we just throw these people away? Because you want to have, everybody wants their product cheaper, better, faster. And the only way we can do that is by getting rid of people.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's this weird conundrum. So I can't even get on board with the immigration argument because that's so short-sighted to what the tidal wave that's coming that nobody's talking about,
Well, and we're seeing the rumblings of it right now, right? Because there are, job unemployment has been decreasing since 2010, right? So since the peak of the Great Recession in 2010, the unemployment rate has been steadily decreasing. So while people want to be like, Trump's bad for the economy, he's not bad for the immediate economy, but he's also not the reason why we're having lower unemployment rates. Like, this was already a trend that was happening, and he's keeping it going, which is pretty predictable. But
they financed
we're at this point where we have low unemployment, right? But we have another problem that people are not speaking about, like you say, and that is that there are jobs that need to be filled that nobody is qualified for because the job market has changed. And so we need tech people, companies need people to come in and do these tech jobs, and nobody can do them.
Yeah, right.
And they're not qualified. And so companies are having to, create internship programs and do all this other stuff.
Yep.
So, like you said, the market has already changed, and while it's great that the unemployment rate has been decreasing for the last 8 years and may continue to decrease for another 2, I would think, the fundamental problem that you have people who are inherently unemployable in our modern society is not going to go away.
Well, and I would argue this too, Heather. It's all finance. It's all debt. It's all financed.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're 100% right. Like, I think that especially just recently, but like
well, we had all those quantitative easings for years. That was all financed, right? Now, some of that got paid back. It did, but not all of it. All right. And then because when you cut revenue, you got to finance because you didn't spending wasn't cut. We just cut revenue coming in. That's all that happened. So that's got to be financed. The government still, you know what I'm saying? So the economy's doing good. What until when? And when does? Holy cow! If you look at this in any kind of logical fashion at all, there's no way you could keep doing this. So when does the hammer fall? That's the question.
And it's frustrating for me because two presidential candidates actually had plans for easing some of this economic problem and paying back the incredible debt that we owe and move to a more in the black model. And that was Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders. And they both had economic plans that included paying down the deficit, and increasing our GDP, which people will be like, well, the GDP is so great. Yep, the GDP was this high in 2014 too, because shit is cyclical. So like,
Yeah, right.
but then what happened after that, right? It's not because of Trump, though. I mean, he did give that minor bump by unchaining the economy, and cutting the tax rate. But
Yep.
those are minor. Again, he cut revenue, right? He cut revenue.
Right.
Which he's not the first to do that. It's not like Trump's an idiot, and many presidents have taken that same tact, right?
Yep.
Like he's not the first. But we didn't want that because again, the nearsightedness, right? Like in the lack of logic, we don't want our taxes to go up, right? We don't want to increase revenue with taxes, and we don't want to increase revenue by pursuing new endeavors like nuclear power, and we don't want to increase revenue by funding science, which has an incredible return.
Right. Yep.
We don't want to do those things. We don't want to do those things. We want nothing to change but except our taxes, and we want those to go down, and magically we want everything to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, but don't you dare take away any of the stuff that you do for me now.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
but don't you raise what it costs for you to do it in any way, shape, or form, and I want you to do more for me,
right,
for less money.
and I would say too that people don't really even understand like the extent to what the government does for them. Like people, like, you don't miss city trash until you move to some place where you have to bring everything to the dump, right?
Yeah, right. Or have to pay it just out of pocket every month to have some private service come do it for you, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and again, it all goes back to logic issues. Like, they should. I mean, it's great. I taught my students when I was teaching that the mitochondria was the powerhouse of the cell. And that's fine and whatever. But hopefully, what I really wanted to teach them, what I really felt the point of science and education is to teach critical thinking.
Yep.
And to teach that you don't have to think about a problem in just a scientific way, but you should ask questions, and you should question things, and you should question yourself and your own beliefs, and if you have questions that can't be answered, you should systematically find a solution. And and I think if we did that, there'd be a lot less ridiculousness.
Yeah.
But it's moving the opposite way, right? Like,
I don't know that that's true. I certainly I agree with you that it sure feels that way most of the time. And I think it feels that way because we're just, for lack of a better word, but I think we're just exposed to each other far more than like you or I didn't grow up in this highly connected world. However, here we are in it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that my personal opinion and what I find to be more logical is that the world started finally having this grand conversation because, good, bad, or indifferent, the most amount of people on this planet have access to the most amount of information ever in the history that we understand of mankind on this planet. Okay. And when you have something like that happen, I think this is the inevitable result of that, finally having the great conversations about things, and that results largely in the appearance of a fight, right? But but it's happening nonetheless, and it has to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know how to feel about this, right? So, like, another aspect is that I didn't know how many races. I grew up in New England, where we were very quietly racist, so I didn't know how many racist people were in the world, and how many people still held those beliefs. I really thought it was an artifact of another time, And when people started to say the things they say on the internet, sometimes people I knew well. And I was like, man, a lot of people were like, they should shut up. But I thought, well, boy, is it better to know? Maybe it's better to know that Grandma June is a raging homophobe, and you can kind of meet that where it is, than it is to go along in your life thinking that she's a reasonable person and being surprised and hurt, when it's not the case. So maybe it's like better to know when somebody is an anti-intellectual, and you can kind of like meet them where they are, than to be shocked and surprised, like when you go to vote and you see and you meet somebody with a flat Earth T-shirt, that you thought was not stupid. So it is hard, but it's so I get what you're saying, like that it's a grand conversation, and I think before the election, I'd done a good job not being an asshole online, right? But after the election, I did not do a good job, and I still have to try not to be an asshole online. And and the reason is because I just was so shocked and hurt and angry to learn how many people that I thought were reasonable people were just totally devoid of logic and totally unwanting
Right.
and unwilling, and so I was mad about it, and so I acted like an asshole. But I think that's kind of my fault, because maybe if I instead had been kinder and more like used Socratic questioning and things like that, maybe I might have had better experiences. So
Nah,
maybe.
they would just be. I think, again, I'm a little biased now because I'm a little pissed too. But I think what you end up with is them still just as devoid of truth, just not
Yeah.
as upset about it. I think that's all that ends up happening. Is they're just not
Yeah.
as pissed about it.
Yeah. I mean, I've had one or two experiences where I've talked to people in real life, or where I've talked to them online, and and refrain from being a total dick.
Yeah.
And those experiences, even if they don't convince the other person, which I think like I also have to ask myself, how much hubris do I have that I feel like it's my job to
Yes.
convince somebody else that I'm right?
Correct. Yep.
But I feel like those interactions are at least more positive for me, and I'm trying to like do that more. I mean, I still lose my shit sometimes when people say ridiculous things, but it's like, I don't need you to agree with me, but I would like to believe that at the very least you see that my argument is well constructed, and that it's not like stupid libertard. Like, that's probably my two least favorite sayings online are libertard and social justice warrior. Libertard because I like statistically socially liberal tends to be correlated with being smarter.
Okay, but yeah, but you gotta. That's and there's the problem. How do you measure that? Because what you're
Yeah.
talking about is things like straight IQ, education, da 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 da.
Well,
Okay.
so it's a chicken and the egg thing,
Yeah.
right? IQ is not the immutable thing we think it is, and
Right.
so better educated leads to more liberal opinions, probably because you're around more diverse people, and can raise your IQ, right? Not a lot, but a little bit. Um, you know,
Well, the
that being
acceptance
said,
level in an educated society is much higher.
right,
Or I'm sorry, the acceptance level in an educated society of ignorance is much lower. Is what I
right.
mean. Like the societal rejection of it is just way bigger.
So they've done studies where like they have tested people's discrimination against low choice and high choice individuals. So like a low choice individual would be somebody who's gay, right? So or black or Jewish, right? So these are groups that are pretty low choice. You're basically born into that group, right? High choice groups are like religious, like born again Christians, right? Or being Mason, right? Or I'm struggling to think of high choice groups that get discriminated against because
Oh, I see
but
what you're saying. Okay, yep, that makes
yeah,
sense. Yep.
so groups that you can choose to be a part
Yeah,
of,
you
right?
opt in. You can opt
Democrat.
into and opt out of it.
Right,
Yeah.
right, like being a Democrat, right, or
Yep.
being a Republican, right?
Yep.
Because you choose those. So the lower your IQ and the more difficulty you have on IQ and critical thinking essays, the more likely you are to be discriminatory towards low choice groups. And the higher your IQ, the more likely you are to be discriminatory against high choice groups, right? So like when people talk about liberal smugness and liberal elitism, like they're right. because liberal people, and especially, highly educated liberal people on the far left, tend to be really critical of people who say would choose to be a Trump supporter, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah, and that's true.
Very, very critical. And they don't have a lot of regard for those people, right? Because they chose it.
Right.
So very ironically, because we tend to view conservatism as people who punish those, like punish people for situations they can't help.
Right.
But on the left, there's this idea that if you are in a high choice group that is unfavorable, or even something like being in the NRA, right, that they don't have a lot of regard for you, whereas low IQ people, or I shouldn't say just lower, and we're not talking about people with IQs below 70. We're talking about like probably 90, right?
Right.
Lower IQ people tend to have a high degree of discrimination against low choice groups, right? So those are the people who hate you because you're black or hate you because you're gay. And so I would argue that, and that is one very esoteric example of liberal people being more, or higher educated people being more socially liberal, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's true. I mean, it feels right, but you're basically saying that not only does that feel right, there's actual data that says that that's true, right?
Yeah. It doesn't mean that they're less discriminatory, right?
It just changes the way they're discriminatory.
It's just who they discriminate.
Yeah. Wow. So we're talking human condition type shit here now. Then is what it seems like. It's the target of that behavior may change based on socioeconomic status, race, things like that.
Right. So and behaviorally, we know that there are, we all want to be on the in group, right? We tend to relate better to our in group.
It's more fun. It sure feels more fun.
Yeah, it's very rewarding cognitively. So so if you go to college and you experience a lot of different people, your in group is a lot bigger. You a lot of more diverse people in your in group. If you never move out of a small coal mining town in Virginia, and you're struggling economically, and you didn't have a lot of education opportunities, and you're just doing everything you can to get by, you are very bonded to the people who are like you in your in group, and you are very discriminatory and very eager to believe that people outside of your group are why you're in the position you're in.
Yep.
And you don't really take into consideration the fact that the people that, like Muslims or black people or gay people, didn't choose,
Right. Right. Yeah. And based on being lucky enough to be born inside a certain border structure, could have enormous ramifications on your potential and quality of life, period. It's insane, right?
Right. But they just don't have, you know what I mean? That it's just not a thing. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of very smart people in the world who are jerks and bigots. I'm sure, that's true. Watson, who helped discover DNA. I can't remember if it was Watson or Crick, but one of them was a heavy eugenicist, and very racist. So you can be really smart and still be a dick. I'm not saying, and you can be really nice and you could be really low IQ, I guess, and not, and not be a dick,
Right.
We're not talking about absolutes, but rather propensities and probabilities. But that's, that's a problem. And,
and a big one.
And a big one. And, but it's also a problem then for the left to say, well, we're smarter, so you should do what I say, which I think has been prescribed a lot, right? A tactic they've used a lot. And
absolutely. Yes.
Have had very little regard for people who, who don't have the same education or opportunities of education as them.
That had Bill Maher eating his words, right? Because he was famous for saying something, and I'm going to paraphrase, I think, to just shove it down their throats.
Yeah,
it's what's best for them, whether they believe it or not. You know what I mean? Kind of attitude.
Yeah,
and that's foment. That was that. Some of that has caused some real issues. I mean, no doubt.
Yeah, and it does cause issues, right? And it reinforces the idea that you are right. So like if you are somebody who is a bigot and you know you're struggling and you know immigrants are taking your job even though they're really not, and then these liberal jerks come along and they don't have a lot of regard for you and they don't even try to understand where you're coming from, but then they start to tell you all these ways in which they're gonna, you know, take more taxes from you and make you do things you don't want to do.
Yeah, right.
It's gonna make you double down, and we saw that like with the ACA. So I'm sure you remember, but you know, a little while after the ACA got passed, or right before it got passed, this viral video was released of somebody in Obama's sphere talking about how basically, yeah, like they were just going to have to, you know, stupid people were just going to
Yep.
have to accept this,
Yep.
and how it was going to be expensive, but we're going to tell them it's not because otherwise they won't, you know, this is what's best for them and they won't get, I mean, it won't pass.
Right.
You know, and you know, and that is a reality. You know, the ACA, I read the ACA in its entirety. You know, like I knew it was going to be expensive before it passed.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to cause tax increases. You know, I knew all these things. I had the time at the time to read it, you know, and excessive, you know, it was accessible to me. But you know, I wasn't surprised. I knew exactly that that's what was happening, right? Which is why when people were like, you know, I'm not sure about the ACA, I wasn't like, you know, well, you're just stupid. You just, I was like, yeah, if you understand it, I can see if you're poor. Well, not if you're poor, because it actually was great for poor people. If you're like middle class, upper middle class,
Yep.
or well off, I can see why you're
not going to be happy. Yeah.
Yeah, like I
big
get
chop, a big one.
Yeah.
My struggle with all of that was, again, I thought that they were applying solutions to the wrong problems yet again, and I think a lot of that comes from not having representation that really can understand things past a political spectrum.
Well, I will say with the ACA, it actually the problem with the ACA was that it was the long haul plan.
Yep.
Right. So like the whole point of that ACA was that if you have a healthier populace now, it's going to be expensive, but later on, it's going to be better and less expensive.
Yeah, but that, you know, and here's the issue, right? And I agree with you 110%. Okay. But the problem is as a society, we have a fundamental flaw. That fundamental flaw is that we don't think our own citizens are worth investing in. Okay?
Yeah.
That is a huge problem.
Right.
Okay. When we inwardly, even we look inwardly as at our own citizenry and say, we're not worth investing in. You know, that's like that's a character flaw. That's an issue.
Yeah. Well, we believe the myth of Ben Carson, right? So like we all want to believe that if somebody in America just buckles down,
bootstrappy, get bootstrappy,
it pulls them up by themselves up by their bootstraps, then they could do it. And so that gives us an avenue to say that they're not worth the investment because look at them, they're still poor, even though they live in America, and they didn't take the action they needed to take. They didn't have my favorite phrase of all, personal responsibility, right?
It reconciled this, you know, as a kid, I grew up on welfare, food stamps, the whole 9 yards, right? And then my party that I was part of was because I'll freely admit I was a Republican. I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I've stopped participating in team sports. I don't do it anymore. But here was my group, my tribe was telling me how food stamps and welfare was such a horrible thing, and everybody that was on it was nothing but a bunch of lazy bums or immigrants and people that shouldn't be, you know, living off of the taxpayers' dollars. Okay, and I will say that before I was the age of 30. In just my income tax alone, I had paid off my entire family share of welfare and food stamps that kept my family from starving to death and kept us, you know, not having to live out of a car or on the streets. Okay. And when you add up my brothers and sisters, we've way more than paid back any societal burden we ever placed as a family. Okay. For our parents being flawed human beings. So the United States made money off of us. by
Right.
investing in us for welfare and food stamps and a place to live growing up. They made or made a ton of money off of us
Yeah.
kids. So
Yeah.
that was an investment.
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea,
Yeah.
because it turned what would otherwise have been a family that probably would have reverted to whatever means necessary to get
Yes.
by, okay, and made us all become functioning, tax-paying, highly
Yeah.
skilled, educated, tax-paying citizens. And so that was a huge problem with me because I'm
Yeah.
sitting here going, I'm here because of that. What do
Yeah.
you're telling me I'm worthless?
Yeah.
But I paid that debt back multiple times now by myself, you
Yeah.
know? So it was always this weird. This country has this problem, in my opinion, in the world. I think, like, that their own citizens or the own people that are around them aren't worth investing in. Yes, they are, because when they do better, the society is better. For
Yeah.
everybody.
I often say when people, say negative things about social welfare programs, first of all, it's like it's a fraction of the military budget, right? Like it's like we're really not spending a lot of money on it to begin with. But I said,
That's
the
crazy.
worst part is that you're pissed off about these primarily white women and children, right, who are getting food, but we're only giving them enough to protect you from having to face their poverty every day. Like the difference between us and New Delhi is welfare. Like and we pay just enough so that you're not confronted with the uncomfortable reality of other people's poverty.
Yeah, and
You,
that's it. Exactly.
you you're paying for a cleanup service. So
Yep.
you pay taxes for your trash service because that's kind of what you're doing. Like you're not giving them the best life possible. You're not paying for them to live large. You're just paying enough so that you're not confronted with the realities of poverty in America on a daily basis. Like
that really
they're
goes.
still impoverished.
Oh no, absolutely, and that goes back to that. What the hell do we do when 40% of workforce populations are supplanted in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah.
Okay, and so are these people worthless now? All of
Yeah.
a sudden, people that are being laid off because of the way the socioeconomic environment is playing out. Okay. I can't get my mind around looking at people that have been displaced and going, you're somehow less than worthy.
Yeah. But it goes back to in group and out group, right?
Yep.
And and it goes back to that low choice discrimination, right? So there are people in this country who are elite, right? Who have a lot of money, who are very elitist, who wield that low choice discriminatory group as a weapon to just live large, basically. And so we should all be looking around to each other, like you say, and asking each other, what are we going to do about this impending crisis? Like, what are we going to do about this impending
Right.
economic crisis? How are we going to make sure that people have access to jobs so that they can do what they need to do and live? And if they don't have access, like, what are we going to do so that we as a society don't become a third world country all of a sudden? But it's much more cognitively satisfying to believe that there's a scapegoat group that you can blame, and if you can just get behind the right brand of nationalism, then somehow that person's going to come fix your problems.
Right.
And that's, careful who we back, right? We have to be careful, like the brand of nationalism and the brand of solution that people are peddling.
Yep.
And we always be asking ourselves, does the end justify the means, right? Like, my oldest daughter is deaf and she's gay, right? Like there is no economic gain that would justify me voting for a politician that would load the Supreme Court with people who are going to take away her rights, her civil rights. Like there's no amount of money in the world for our economy or for anybody else that could make me give up her civil rights.
Yeah.
There is no and so, but just logically, that's true. Like, just logically, I cannot give that for money, right?
Sure.
And people need to be asking themselves, to your point, what are we going to give for so that we can keep our heads above water?
Yep.
Are we going to give our fellow Americans up? Are we going to throw them under the bus and let them starve so that we can have this elitist economy?
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, that's, people will push back, and, obviously I don't think, let me just say, Trump is not a homicidal maniac. I don't think he's a monster, like Hitler. I don't.
And hey, guess what? The system of checks and balances been holding up pretty well overall. I mean, it's not perfect. It's not the greatest necessarily or fastest, but you know what? It's kind of been holding up.
It has. But I would say to people who support him and use the economy for their justification, I would say to them, is it worth taking away rights from Mexican Americans or immigrants who have come here legally, or even people who work for our economy and contribute to our economy, even if they may be here illegally? Is it worth looking at our other fellow Americans and saying, yep, we're going to throw you under the bus?
Yeah. And you know what? At the end of the day, isn't this really the rub, Heather? Don't you feel that it breaks down to two questions? Are you contributing to society, or are you siphoning off of society? Isn't that always what it breaks down to, right? So at the end of the day, when people have an issue with, like, say, immigrants that come into the United States, okay, and work, all we're really pissed about is whether the playing field's level or not, okay, at the end of the day. So if they paid taxes, for instance, if you could set up but that goes back to like a worker visa program, and I don't even want to go down that. But that's kind of where the rub always comes, is where one group feels that it's being unfairly disadvantaged against somebody else. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, we kind of have control over that.
Right.
At the end of the day. Right. So, but the problem is that until we as a group start to understand that there's no advantage, there's no financial advantage to the teams,
right,
to fix stuff necessarily, and to calm everything down, because the inflammatory stuff is what makes people break out their checkbooks and write checks.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's sort of almost a symptom of the system itself. And it depends upon the society, sort of understanding these things.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard, right? Because it's hard to understand things when you're under severe economic pain, which a lot of Americans, again, cognitively and logically, people aren't great, right? And so people aren't understanding that there was a Great Depression, there was a depression, and I'm not an economist, so I'm not prepared to say like it was George Bush's fault. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I suspect that there are some elements there, but I also think that the economy is pretty cyclical, and that a lot of times, like, who the president is doesn't matter as much as we like to think it does.
Right. Right. I mean, I went deep on that stuff with the economy, I got to tell you, and with whether it's with Keynesian economics or Hayek. And the debate between currency versus having a like a gold back type monetary system to the point where I mean, it was looking into the historical structures of economies and stuff like that, and I mean, it all boils down to the same thing. It all boils down to available resources versus demand. It always does, and that's what gives, like, I'm not in this, and I'm not giving advice here, but I'm not in the stock market now in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't get it. I don't get how you have a Dow Jones Industrial average of 24,000 when it was 12,000, and all the factories that I used to walk through were running full tilt. It's 24,000, and them places are empty barns now. So where is this capacity coming from? I don't see it anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think there's my personal opinion is, economically speaking, like you said, it's always cyclical. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think there's a cycle coming again, and I think they're going to get closer and closer together.
Oh yeah, I think so too. And and I think that a lot of people experienced economic hardships as a result of that Great Recession, and didn't understand that like it could not possibly have been Obama's fault that the great when he just came to office, just like people
Right.
can't, a couple months
But
ago,
the
stock
team.
market took a real serious dip.
Yep.
Like, just it was a big dip. It lost like a historic amount of points. And everybody was like, see, because Trump's bad for the economy. And I was like, man, the stock market goes up, it goes down.
Yeah.
He does not have as much influence over this. It's not his fault, right? If it wasn't Obama's fault when Obama was president, then it can't be Trump's fault now that Trump's president.
Yeah.
Like, those logically, that's not okay.
Well, and we have I mean, I could devolve into conspiracy theories real quick,
Yeah.
but you think about this. We have a situation where the world's economy almost completely collapsed, and people, I don't know if people realize how close to like lights out type situation we were getting to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one person has gone to jail.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
Okay, so the people that are literally tasked with keeping all of this stuff alive somehow failed to the point where massive amounts of current capital had to be financed by the taxpayers and dumped into the economy. Okay, a large and not a small portion of which was never paid back. Okay,
Right.
This happened, and
Yeah.
one person went to jail. Okay, so. That's a problem,
Yeah.
and it's a problem that because there was so little repercussion, it's going to happen again. I'm just telling you it is, because I don't even know what we did to fix it. Nobody really understands.
Yeah. And like, so these people that were in economic pain, and had problems because of the Great Recession, instead of like, and probably very naturally so, looked and were like, it's because of Obama, right? Like, that's where the thanks Obama phrase comes in, right?
Yep.
So, but it wasn't, I mean, it really wasn't. And then, actually, like I said, I don't believe any president really like holds the economy in the palm of their hand, but he did a lot that helped, by borrowing a lot, right? Like,
Right.
That's not like he's a miracle worker. He took on a lot of debt, but he did help bring the economy back to a point where most people didn't have like 1920 level depression, and they're all, thanks Obama, stupid Democrats, blah blah blah. And it's just so frustrating because, like, these people barely like you said, the cycles are getting closer. 8 years, 10 years is not long between economic recessions.
Right.
And it's coming again, and these people still have not recovered. And they, and I have to say, like, voting for Hillary Clinton I don't believe would have made this, like, I think maybe Trump has accelerated this cycle by a year or two, but it was coming anyway.
Right.
Like, and Hillary had no plan to change anything.
Right.
She had no plan to try to right the course. Like, she was just kind of keep on trucking. Like, she wasn't really going to change the course of the ship too much. And so this would have come anyway, but maybe, like I said, 2 to 4 years instead of in the next year or two. And it just sucks because, like you said, instead of really thinking about it and voting for people to represent them appropriately and trying to finance and put forth good quality candidates, it's like they're not even going to have time to recover, and they're going to be right back in the shit.
Yeah, I felt that and I'm a person who I've never voted for a Democrat in my life. Okay, tell you how Republican, air quotes Republican, I've been my whole life. Okay, I've never voted for a Democrat in my life, still to this day. Okay, and I will say this about Barack Obama as president. I've never felt once with him as president, however, that he didn't necessarily have what he felt were the best interests of all the citizens of the United States combined. Okay, that's all he was. Now I have arguments with his methodology. I can have arguments with him
Sure. Yeah.
philosophically. Okay, but I really believe that he cared
Right.
about the general welfare of the citizenry of this country. Okay. And after him, we ended up with an election where I don't believe either one of them did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And there we were.
Yeah.
So I was like, what do you do?
And to your point, like I have to say, I know a lot of people hated George W. Bush, and now in retrospect, he was a pretty shitty ass president. But I never once felt like he didn't care. You know what I mean? I felt like he took his role as president seriously, and I don't agree with what he did and stuff, but I did feel like he was
Yeah.
doing his best. Like I did feel like he was trying to do his best, or what he thought was best.
Yeah.
And like I said, I didn't think he was the best guy for the job, but you know, but he was my president. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I felt that way about his. I've actually felt like his dad was a really good president. Um, George Bush Sr. was a great president. And Bill Clinton had some real misses at the time. I was real upset about some things that he did during his presidency, like don't ask, don't tell specifically. Um,
I was in the military for Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Boy, was that good times.
yeah, really, and you know, but again, I felt like a lot of the stuff he was doing, I mean, and he did bring the economy into the black for what it's worth, and
Yep.
I did feel like he was trying to do his best, and I felt that way about Reagan. I can honestly say that Trump is the only president I've ever experienced in my lifetime, and I've only experienced so many presidents,
Right.
only in my 40s, that I felt like has only his personal interest at heart. And so when people say, well, he is your president because he's technically the president of the United States, I feel pretty justified in making the semantic argument that he's not my president, because he literally doesn't represent me. Literally doesn't have my best interest,
Yeah.
like the country's best interest at heart. And that makes him not my president.
But I'm not so sure you wouldn't have felt the same way ultimately about Hillary Clinton too.
I may have.
Yeah.
You know what? I have.
Because wasn't that kind of your point, and
yeah.
that comes
yeah.
full circle. Is this is to me it all boils down to this crisis of us not feeling like our fellow citizens are
Yeah.
worth investing in. So if they're on the other team, they
Yeah.
must be so ultimately destroyed as to be completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like that is the line now, and you see it. I mean, I see it before I got away from it, but all of these alt news sources and stuff that pop up on Facebook, all of the verbiage that they use.
Yeah.
XYZ Democrat eviscerates Republican. Republican absolutely destroys Democrat. Back and forth, and it's like, no, man, they had a debate. No,
Yeah.
Nobody even bled. What are we talking? What where's this language coming from, right? And
Yeah.
and to me, I worry about that because I think that's the process of desensitizing yourself to the fact that that other person's still a human being.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And I think that, while of course the free press is an important institution and we need to maintain it at all costs, we also as citizens are having this unprecedented issue because of the accessibility of news, where news sources have begun to sensationalize, and not just like Fox News and Breitbart, which I never say right. How do you say that?
I think it's Breitbart.
Breitbart.
Yeah.
I
I always called it Breitbart, but I think it's
Yeah.
Breitbart. Yeah.
Yeah, but but also Huffington Post and other news outlets, and I try to be really sensitive to, as you say, the verbiage. When right after Donald Trump was elected, he gave a press conference, and I read this article, and it just popped up in my newsfeed, and I don't remember what source it was, but the author was like, people were applauding for things he was saying, and definitely paid supporters in the background. And I thought to myself, hey, hold up. Like, you're a reporter. You cannot just claim that the president of the United States paid people to be yes men and cheer him on in a press conference without evidence. Like you cannot do that. Like
Right.
you lost my, I think it was Huffington Post, now that I'm really thinking about it, I thought, I will never read anything you write again with any amount of serious consideration.
Right. Right.
Like, logically, and in an evidence-based way, you've lost my trust, because if you were willing to make that egregious a claim
Right.
without evidence, then I can't trust you.
Yeah, and you unsubscribe from it, don't you? Ultimately, it just turns you off so much that you're like, I can't trust anything this group of people say now.
Yeah,
because
so
it's so bad.
And I try to, but again, that goes back to critical thinking, right? Like, a lot of people that are good critical thinkers online, had that same reaction to that same article, and it was a very liberal skewed article. Like, it was very anti-Trump. I mean, it was, but even very, liberal yet critical thinking people that I know read that article and they were like, oh no, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm frustrated that I don't see a lot of that on the other side, and I guess I shouldn't say, maybe the people I know tend to be more critical thinker oriented. But I don't see a lot of that on the right with Fox News and things like that. Like, if somebody comes to me with an article from Forbes or Wall Street Journal, I'm like, okay, you know what I mean?
Right.
You come back and your argument is a Fox News piece with ridiculous verbiage. I can't trust your opinion to really. I can't trust you to critically evaluate information. You're clearly not doing a good job. And I push back on that. But
I think the New York Times is personal opinion. I think the New York Times is playing fast and loose with some press privileges here. Of late, because I'm seeing them release anonymously sourced stories.
Oh yeah,
that I'm not sure that there's actually an anonymous source for. It's just that the plausibility for this whatever statement being true is really high based on the circumstantial evidence of the claim. And they're coming, I think I'm not positive of this, and I don't know how you would ever know, okay? But I think that my opinion is that the New York Times is doing that. They're saying that they have anonymous sources, and they're laying out stories, and then sort of letting the burden of proof process it out factually, okay? And they've been wrong a couple times. But they've been right way more than they've been wrong. Don't get me wrong. But there's something about that. It's like, is that really journalism anymore? Okay. Yeah. What is that? That's something else.
Yeah. And again, like, because I am, science minded, I don't love anonymous sourcing, right? I mean, I appreciate how sometimes you need anonymous sourcing, but I want to see Woodward and Bernstein level anonymous sourcing. I want to see anonymous sourcing where you have actual evidence, but the name is redacted,
right. Exactly. Yeah.
And so I have to, when the anonymous letter about the subterfuge of the Trump administration came out, I didn't really pay that much attention to it. I was kind of like, first of all, what the fuck? Like, that's not how democracy works.
Right.
Like, so if you are doing this, like, that's, I think you kind of overplayed your hand there, because that's not okay.
Right.
And second of all, like, even if you were doing this because you felt you had a moral compunction to do this, your story would be more compelling if you hadn't given it anonymously,
Right.
And then right there at that same time, Woodward's book came out, and I was like, you know what? Why the fuck is anybody even listening to you when we've got Woodward's book and it's well sourced?
And it's going to be, because there's a reputation built into that. Yes.
So I was really disappointed that they even published that letter. I felt like, what the fuck? Like, why didn't you just publish a review of Woodward's book?
Right.
Like this is not a cool thing.
Yeah, I mean, you struggle because the New York Times is supposed to be the paper of record, and I'm looking at some of the stuff that they're doing, and I'm going, man, I don't know, and of course this is all an opinion. It's just an observation of what it seems like they're doing. Okay, but I'm looking at some of the things that's going on, and I'm a huge advocate, a First Amendment advocate. Okay, I mean, look, I do a podcast. Yeah. And so I'm a big proponent for people having a voice and all this kind of stuff. Okay, but I don't think that's what they're doing.
No.
I think that they're creating anonymous sources to say things that they think is true. Okay, and then they're using that as sort of the worm in the wood to go in and be able to dig into things. Now, unfortunately, I think they've been right doing it quite a few times. You follow me? And so now they're sort of establishing a reputation, but I don't think that that's journalism anymore. That's some sort of, I don't know what that is. That's some sort of, what would you call that? Activist press? I don't know what that is, but I don't think that's journalism anymore.
I think that one of the hardest things to do, and one of the most necessary things to do, is if you feel vehemently that, a political movement or a political circumstance is wrong, then you, in doing things that are wrong, then you have a deep obligation to keep any exposure of those wrongdoings above reproach. And I think that if you start to do things like make not quite 100% well-researched or well-proven claims, or you start to sling mud, then what you are doing is always counterproductive. I mean, I don't like Trump, right? But certainly I would never tell lies about him or
fabricate things. Yes.
Possibly true stories about him, because if you do that, then you are no better,
Right.
And if somebody is doing something, or a political party or group is doing something that you inherently and morally disagree with, then you have to tread carefully and make sure that your actions come from a place that isn't just bitterness and resentment. Like people who say Trump is treasonous, Trump is, like, do you know what treason means?
Right.
I don't think no.
Right.
Like, what do you
And
want?
let's certainly see some evidence before we convict somebody. Okay.
But that bar is so high for me. Like, you can't just throw that word around. That's not okay. He's still the president. Like, we're still a country.
Yeah, buddy.
Like,
Right.
you can't go demanding his head.
I think it's, and I find credence to this. Okay, it's a bizarro world in a lot of ways. Okay, especially for folks that think critically, like we've been talking about. But there's this weird theory that it's a conspiracy theory. I love this kind of stuff. Okay, that some event or experiment at CERN has knocked knocked us into like some weird alternate existence. And that's why, like, it feels like the whole world's going crazy, Is that, you know what, Heather? I think Elon Musk is right. I think that the president is like the captain of an extremely large ship with a really tiny rudder.
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of the day. And I start to question things like how, this country, United States, we pride ourselves on having this thing called a representative government, right? How does this become representative when you have 330 million people?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not, and that's not an argument against the founders or any way, saying that, well, I don't have respect for that or the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, or not. I'm not even saying that. Massive respect, because look, we put people on moons and stuff. Okay, so obviously it got us this far. My question isn't whether it was good or not. My question is, does it still really work as a representative government? Period. Okay,
Yeah.
is it the model we still need? I'm a big fan that I think a lot of our problems as a society would be fixed if we treated our tax revenue the same way we treat corporations, in that We should, like, all of us should pay all of our taxes, the entirety of our taxes, in my opinion, to the localist government, the very closest government to us. And then they should make sure we're taken care of and send any of that remaining to the state level. And then the state should do the same to the federal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, everybody should take care of their absolute necessities and benefits first. And then on what's left, like a business does, you pay taxes on.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why I think that would work was because then it would be in the best interest of all of our local representatives, right? To make sure as much of that money stayed in our communities as possible.
Right.
You know, so it would make things far more representative. The problem is it would also make things become very stark in terms of public education and stuff like that, because poor communities would just have to suck it up, right? I mean, they would be screwed. So, but that's kind of the problem, is at the end of the day is, you know, how do you give that power? You want representation, right? You want someone to hear you and represent your beliefs or your views or your needs. You need that, okay? But I'm not so sure some guy or gal that's lives in Washington, D.C. and has, you know, has a summer residence or whatever in Ohio or in North Carolina. I don't know how that person represents that whole state anymore. There's too many people. Like when this whole concept came together, there's more people in Rhode Island than was in the entire country, you know? So I'm not sure that they were counting on this becoming this big, and I don't know that it still works. Maybe it does. I mean, it's holding up now, so.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think if you talk to any American, regardless of political leanings, and you said to them, do you think your representative, your politicians in Congress represent you? They would like universally say no, right?
Yeah, I think support is like 9%.
So we know they don't represent us, but somehow we have a cognitive dissonance where we make the person who then runs for president like our team mascot, right?
Right.
So somehow magically, even though our representatives don't represent us, this one person is going to represent us. And of course they can't, and they don't.
Well, government in general has like a 9% approval rate, but has something like a 90+% re-election rate.
Right.
That's a weird dichotomy, right? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why that is. I think like sometimes just and I do think that we're seeing a shift now where you're seeing a lot of regular, average, everyday people running for government.
Yes, definitely.
And so I think maybe some of that will change. My stepfather's sister was married to a Roosevelt, like one of, you know, and he was a supreme asshole. Like it never occurred to him that like he wasn't entitled to be, you know, in government in some way and rich because he was a Roosevelt, you know, and it like, and I think there's a lot of that, you know, there's a lot of well-off, you know, and I don't want to be like, you know, death to whitey or anything. But there's a lot of well-off white men, old white men, really old, right? In their 70s who are like just totally out of step with the everyday average American who are sitting in Congress, who are saying ridiculous and stupid things like bringing snowballs to you know, open floor discussions about climate change, and saying that because it snowed once, climate change isn't a thing, you know, or just like, or who say ridiculous things like, you know, just contrary hypocritical things.
Well, would you, if
just, you know, just 2 years ago, you know, totally contradicting themselves, you know.
If you were to take all of these representatives, right, and let's say you just waved your magic wand and you got rid of all of them, and you said, okay, we're gonna have an interviewing process for the best qualified people for these positions. Would you hire anybody that doesn't own a personal computer and doesn't know how to use one?
Right.
Would you hire someone that has never sent or received a text message to govern the FCC?
Yeah.
Okay, would you do these things? Like most people will be like, "Oh, hell no." Well, guess what?
Dude.
That's who's running these organizations now. You know, these are the people.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's nuts, right? And you know, but again, like just a little bit of critical
Critical
thinking
thinking. Yep.
in high school, right?
Yep.
Would be enough to tell you, you know, but it's just how it is. I mean, and we see that all the time. We're at work. A lot of times we joke about how the male birth control pill didn't get approved.
Right.
Made men a little nauseous. Well, the female birth control pill can lead to stroke.
Right.
And that's cool, right? Because it's a bunch of white old men making these decisions.
Yeah.
And like another one was they approved I forget now what it was. This hormone replacement. It's like a female Viagra.
Yeah.
They had a lot of scientists speaking about it who were like, this is not a good idea. Like hormonally, this could disrupt a lot of stuff. It's a very shady product. We're not, on and on and on. And on the other side, they had all these men get up and speak about how positively their lives were affected because their wives had a higher sex drive. So, and it passed. It went through the FDA.
Oh my God! Right.
It's like, come on.
Well, that's
so
right.
Pathetically out of touch, with all of us, really, with almost all of us.
I got to watch. Do you know who Alvin Toffler is?
No.
He was just really interesting. He's dead now, unfortunately, but I got to see him speak. He was a futurist, and he gave lectures and would like he advised George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, and advised like Mikhail Gorbachev and stuff like that. He was just really he's got a bunch of books out. One of them's called Future Shock, and so he would talk about things like future trends, and so I was at a business symposium, and it was like Saturday morning type thing where everybody. I'm talking about this thing. There was like 2,000 or 3,000 people easily in this hall, probably closer to 5,000. It's a big deal, okay? It's a pretty good size audience. So they would bring in these really cool keynote speakers and have them speak to us. But this particular speech, everybody had been drinking really heavily the night before because we were in downtown Disney. And so like I'm looking around, like 3/4 of the people in this hall are asleep. And these are all engineers and stuff, okay? So anyway, this man like laid down like the knowledge in this business symposium to the point where I grabbed a notebook and started taking notes. I found him fascinating. You should look him up. He's a really interesting guy. But he really talked. He talked about how the business world was in the equivalent of like the hyperloop lane of life. Okay. And then he went down like through this whole scale of degrees about how education is like on a regular 55-mile-an-hour highway, or something like that. And but government and governing bodies and things like regulatory bodies are not even on, like they're in the ditch next to the gravel road in progress. So there's this weird thing that's happened in the world where, because of the rapid expansion of technology and all of this kind of stuff, where things are happening way faster than governments can possibly keep up with them with any kind of ability to regulate it at all. Yeah. So, he went into this whole thing about key fundamentals, about time, it was deep, like time, space, and knowledge, and how things, succeed and fail based on, their timeliness, the availability space for, like, he was like, if you invented an electric car in 1400, it would be pointless. No one would buy it because it's in the wrong time. It's in the wrong space, like how to understand key fundamentals and things like that. But I found that particular part about how we live in this society. There's no way that the current structure of government could be representative of any kind, because it's 20 years behind the internet already, and losing ground rapidly to what's happening on the internet, right?
Yeah, it's a scary world, like you said, to circle back, we have a lot of technologies and that we could implement to fix a lot of problems.
Yep.
but it's like, it's like it's like the Flash, right? Nobody can see the Flash when he moves because he's so fast.
Right.
It's Congress is the rest of the world, and like, science and technology is the Flash, and they just don't even see it.
Yep.
Can't even see it, and then they're surprised when it has consequences. When things happen, it's like magic to them. Like, and I think some of what we're seeing now is a real, is the swan song of some of the,
Yes.
artifacts from the 1950s. I think
Yep.
Kavanaugh hearing was like the embodiment of that, the embodiment of the establishment having a temper tantrum because, people are having the audacity to push back. And I think there's a lot of that. I think that's what we're seeing with, Mitch McConnell. I mean, I had no love of Boyner. I can't say his name either. It's not Boner, it's Boyner.
Boehner?
Right? Boehner, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I had no love of him, but he had integrity, I felt, and I thought he was doing a fine job and whatever.
He cried a lot.
Huh?
He cried a
What?
lot. He was always crying.
Oh, yeah, he did cry a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
But now, I think what we're seeing is like, this final gasp and desperate clawing to keep the establishment as it has been.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no trend that I've seen with groups like air quotes millennials and any of these groups that says that any of this is sustainable. I mean, the numbers are just not good. There's a change.
So, like,
there's changes coming. There's no doubt.
That's why Gorsh is on the Supreme Court. That's why they're trying to get Kavanaugh on there. They're trying to like give themselves an extra 20 years, to really to try to keep their establishment politics in there. And but again, nearsightedness, right? Because even if Donald Trump got elected again, right? Like the other conservative justices on the court are old.
Right.
Yeah. Too.
It's only a matter of time. It is. And those, for all the criticalness I've had about whether, this system actually is relevant or representative or even works anymore, right? There is there is a benefit to it being so slow.
Yeah,
there is. Okay, it's the process of slowing everything down so that the major decisions aren't made in an inflamed state. You know, so I don't know. Maybe it's still the best solution. It sure doesn't feel representative though.
It's fine for it to be slow, right? But what it needs to be is slow and thorough. And that's the part that's missing, right? Not thorough. It's slow in some ways by design, but in other ways it's slow because the politicians that represent us are dependent on getting fed their information from lobbies because they don't have that information and they're not, you rarely see a politician do any kind of research for themselves, right? Like it's very rare that a topic comes up and a member of Congress really puts in their due diligence in researching and thinking about the problem or the consequences of the legislation they're trying to pass. And it's such a circus, right? Because they say that they stay up all night and they vote on these laws and it comes out and the legislation is like 1,000 pages long and they didn't read it.
Because it's physically impossible.
So what the hell are they voting on? So that they're casting their votes from a totally uneducated or uninformed position, and they just do that over and over and over again. So if the cost of a slow process to government was that they were actually
thorough, yep,
that would be okay, but that's not the case, right?
Right.
And so. And they hold hearings and they're just a joke. Like it's just a joke because like you said, ultimately they all end up just voting for their own team.
Yeah.
And like this, this Kavanaugh hearing, I mean, are the allegations against him true or false? I don't know. I wasn't there. But I will say that anybody who's up for the Supreme Court who will show such obvious and abject partisanism, who will grind an axe and come up with conspiracy theories about the Clintons who will be rude only to the females questioning him, who will cry and stomp his feet like that. He doesn't belong in the Supreme Court, you know.
Oh,
But
yeah, that's the big temperament debate now about him as a candidate right now. Is that exemplary of a temperament that should be not only on the Supreme Court but a judge?
at all.
Yeah,
You
and I don't know, that
So
sure
I mean,
doesn't.
again, it's about logic and critical. Like, not everybody thinks in a logical, critical, and and people have accused me cold manner, right? Pragmatism. I'm pretty pragmatic. Not everybody thinks like that, and not everybody should think like that. Not everybody's the same. But if you're in a position where you have to evaluate information and make crucial decisions for the good of the country that are going to last for decades, you have to be cool, calculating, logical, and pragmatic. You cannot be the kind of person who puts party above
Yeah,
country.
well, I mean, right.
You can't be the kind of person who will make decisions
Yep.
from such an emotional place. And I would argue that he's not fit to even be a judge. Not that judges should never get emotional about anything, but judges should never get emotional about themselves like that. Let's not make the mistake. He's not somebody who's reprimanding a child molester, repeat offender child molester. He's up there because they're asking very easily answerable questions about his drinking.
About his past. Yeah.
And he's getting all flustered and upset and he, it's all the Democrats. I'm sorry, but Democrats went to your frat parties and gave you beer? I don't understand. Like, what are you saying?
Where does this connect? And but again, that's one of them places where I think the New York Times has some of the information that's come out with the way. Now, I'm not saying it didn't vet out and end up being true. I'm not saying that, okay? But there's some stuff that's going on with this Kavanaugh stuff where it looks like to me that the New York Times, based on having a lot of credible, not credible, but a lot of circumstantial sort of indication of the way something went down or happened, that they're like, I think that they knew that there was I think that they manipulated stuff to get the public disclosure of, what's her name, Dr. Morgan?
Ford.
Oh, I'm sorry, right, Dr. Ford. Okay, like I don't like the way that whole thing went down with her having to come out public. Okay, and I mean that because what it looks to me like went down was that she wanted to remain private. However, there was a need for expediency here felt by one team, okay, or people that align themselves with one team. So they pushed some stuff through that sort of that made this happen. So that's the end. Did the ends justify the means?
Yeah, you think they outed her? You think they
I think they outed her. I really do. I don't think they outed her directly, but I think they outed her in the sense that they started putting the crumbs, the bread trail with anonymous sourcing and stuff like that.
They pressured her probably.
To put some pressure on her to just come out public. Yeah.
It could well be, and like I'm no fan of Gorsh either because because of his. I don't know anything about his personal life, honestly, but because of the rulings he made as a judge, I was like, oh my god, this is a guy who is gonna go to bat for big corporate every time. Like he's just every single time he's gonna come out on the side of the big corporation because he has.
Yeah.
But if the Democrats had made the argument that he showed partisanship and that's why he was unsuitable, I would have been like, no, I don't believe he did that. I don't his decisions. I don't think it's somebody I want on the Supreme Court. I don't think they had any foothold for not, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think they had any foothold to be like, no, he's a totally unacceptable candidate. We cannot confirm him. And we shouldn't confirm him. It basically was like, we don't like him. We don't like his decisions, but he really, under questioning, he was very cool as a cucumber. He answered the questions. He wasn't flippant.
Right.
You know, and I believe if allegations like this had come out about him, which let's face it, frat boy in the 80s, I'm sure there were women that he did this to, you know, or was part like that was a culture, right?
Yeah, there was definitely a cultural component to that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, he probably was in some of those situations too. It wouldn't be a surprise, but I believe that under questioning, if he had been in the same position Kavanaugh would have been in, he would have very coolly been like, no, and you know what I mean, like. But it's Kavanaugh's complete and ridiculous breakdown, and his total just naked partisanship
Yeah.
that makes me feel he's unfit.
Yeah.
You know, whether or not these things really happened, I tend to believe they did, but again, that's a belief, not in a, you know, I don't have any evidence. That's just a belief that I have.
And it's a blatant indication. Just this whole nomination process, recent nominating process is just, to me, is just a continuing blatant example of the team politic.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't know. I'd have to think about this. Okay, but what I'm saying is since when has a Supreme Court justice been placed in with a huge? Yeah, no, it has happened. It was
Clarence Thomas.
It was Clarence Thomas, right? Well, like how many votes? It was a vote, like 90.
Yeah.
90 votes or something like that. Unheard of. I mean, you wouldn't be able to get, and that's not accepted as the norm anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, that tells you, right? To me, that's just it. It's like, okay, this is all about team sports again. This isn't about what's best for, you know, I'm on team human. I'm on team people. Okay. Yeah. And that's kind of where I break down with it now. You know, my methodology for voting has become very simple. If I recognize the name and they're an incumbent, then I probably vote for them. If I don't recognize them, then they ain't done shit for me, so I'm voting them out. I'm voting for the other person.
Yeah.
It's just kind of, and that's it. Moving on, you know? Because beyond that, what say do I have in anything at all? None. Yeah. That's it. So do I know you? Yeah, okay. That's, if I know who you are, then somehow in my life you know what I mean? We've managed to cross paths. And I don't mean in the sense that every time I watch a YouTube video, I got to watch a stupid campaign ad, because I just mute those and skip, right? Yeah. I mean, like, I know you because of something that's happened in my life, like an ordinance or something that's affected me. You know, that's what I mean. Do I even know who you are? Yeah. Because if I don't, then you're not doing shit for me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Then I should know you. I should know what you've done.
Yeah.
Then, yeah. That's a good policy. That's a good policy.
And so to take the complexity out of voting for people, because people are like, I don't know, I don't have time to research the issues. No. It does not even have to be that complicated, right? If you recognize the name, then and you don't recognize it in the sense that, oh God, I'm not electing that person again, you know, because that person screwed me. But what I'm saying is, you recognize them as someone that's been beneficial to you, then vote them back in. But if you don't recognize them, or you recognize them in a negative way, then just vote them out. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that, because the cycle repeats. And if you screw up, oh well, you're balanced against the society at large. That if you don't know what you're talking about, someone's going to negate that, you know.
But the problem is, though, that like the association between outcomes in our daily lives and the actions of politicians are very weak and very hard to recognize. So when you have a person who's like, say, comptroller, right, and they do a really good job at comptrolling, like, you aren't going to feel that. You're not going to know them, good or bad. Like, you're only going to know them if they're a crazy bad job, right? So, but also, like, people are really good at in-group identification and team identification. So, like, you know, we constantly and consistently see people who vote against their interest, right? How many, and these videos just made me sick. I hated them. Like, how many people did we see mocked online because they voted for Trump so he would get rid of of Obamacare, not realizing that they were dependent on the ACA? Yeah,
they made it, and they thought that the you know, that's that.
Yeah,
you know, just like, blasting people online. You know, they're yeah, it's crazy.
Like, but like those people, like they just had like they didn't know, because they, you know, they probably don't have maybe they don't have time to be well informed, or you know, there's probably a variety of reasons, but like they, you know, they didn't know. They voted for their team. They thought their team would protect them because their
Right.
team was out there telling them all the time. I am just astounded when Trump gets in front of a group of poor people and starts telling them, and they walk away saying things like, he has my best interest at heart. He speaks for me. He's one of me. He's my kind of guy. I'm like, what the fuck? Did you never watch The Apprentice? Like, I don't understand. No, literally not for you.
Yeah.
Not for you. But he's on their team. And so even if his policies hurt them, like, it would take an avalanche of negative policies to sway them, into not liking him, right? Like an avalanche. Obama was the same. Obama did a lot of things, deported a lot of immigrants. Like, a lot of people on the left were like, we've got to protect the Dreamers. Yeah, and Obama protected the Dreamers while he was fucking shipping their parents back to Mexico.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you know, like, but he was on their team. You know what I mean? He
Yep.
was their team. Nothing he did could be wrong because, and nobody's perfect, right? Nothing he did was wrong because he was on their team. And so even if you were one of those people who ended up paying $4,000 a year out of pocket for your health insurance when before you could just not buy it, and even if that represented an economic hardship to you, if you were well off enough and you loved your team enough, you didn't, you weren't critical of it.
Oh, because when that all went down, I was working for myself. And it was wonderful being, paying the penalty for not being able to afford insurance and then still not having insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you just took a bunch of money that I could have used to at least pay some medical bills away from me, right?
Yeah.
And I still can't afford to pay, as an individual, I couldn't afford to go out and buy health insurance. It was ridiculously expensive,
Yeah.
So did it have an effect on my business? You bet it did. A big one, profound one as an individual, person trying to. It basically made me go back and work for a larger company because then I could at least get buying power.
Yeah.
Right. That's what happened.
Yeah. But there were people who had that same experience as you who still were like, yep, love Obama. Right?
Yeah.
And there are still people who are losing their jobs, who like are gonna be are gonna be at the very bottom of that economic crash, who are like, I love Trump, he speaks for me.
Yeah.
Because just intrinsically and cognitively we're programmed to team up.
Yeah.
And so people,
it's dangerous. It's like, it's weird. But I think it's part of the human condition. You know what it is, and it makes sense why it is. It's probably evolutionary. Okay.
Yeah.
Because, and that's like, that goes back to that whole, people that are like, I'm a lone wolf. Yeah, you're not. No one. No, that's or survival of the fittest is one of the ones that just drives me insane. Okay, because it's like, no, that's not how that works either. There's definitely a component to humanity where we survived by grouping up.
Yeah.
Because if you were the guy that was out, okay, I'm going to be the lone wolf. Well, you got 8.
Yeah.
You're dead. Your genetic line stopped right there, right? So it's sort of inherent. Like, we find safety in our team. Like, somehow in the human condition, we find safety in being part of teams.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that once someone understands that that's a semantic type response, it can also be used to manipulate people against their own ends.
Yeah. And that's what we're seeing, right? That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
We're seeing that.
It's a primal fear.
Always happened. Like, people want to make it like Trump's the first to do this. Of course he is not. There has never been a president elected in our lifetimes, and probably ever, that didn't use some form of that, right?
Yeah.
That didn't build on that, right? Because that's just how humans work.
Right.
He is the first to, I think, so blatantly lie. But even that, to his benefit, because it creates this situation where, like, this cognitive issue where people are like, he's more, they perceive him to actually be more honest because they can see his lies. So like,
Oh yeah, how do you win that? That's what I mean. So logic, you can't have a debate with a lot of folks today because they're afraid.
yeah.
Because when people are irrational, they do irrational things, right? It makes
But
sense.
if you think about it though, like it's not as irrational as it seems. If you perceive politicians to be shady and you think that your problems are because they say one thing and they do another, then and that you never know about it until it's too late, then you would find somebody like Trump refreshing, even though he constantly lies, because you feel more in the know because you see his lies, right?
But
So
yeah, but he's lying for you, kind of
yeah,
thing. Or
right.
my
He's lying.
president's lying for me, or my politician's shady for me.
Yeah, but even when he says things that are like really ridiculous, and not beneficial to the group per se, like they still, at least he's different, right? He speaks for me, he's different. Like he, he went ahead and he filled every office he could with his cronies, and in some cases, like DeVoe, filled them with people who had directly contributed to his campaign, right? Could there be anything further from draining the swamp than to fill it with people who financially backed you? And yet, but at least, like, I talked to somebody a couple weeks ago who was like, but I know, like Duvall was a mistake, but at least I see, at least I know, like this is what, he's gonna do this now, but he's gonna change it up, and at least he's open with his
Mhm.
stuff, not like in the past where like it's a weird cognitive phenomenon,
It,
where it actually makes him seem more trustworthy to them.
I I worked for two presidential campaigns, right? As like county co-chair and stuff like that. And I now observe politics and treat it the same way that I observe and treat professional wrestling. You follow me? That
Yeah,
that for the most part, it's scripted.
yeah,
Okay, it's on autopilot. I don't know however you want to say it. Okay, and most of it's fake. Like,
yeah,
do people get banged up in professional? Yeah, there was a guy that died. He fell out of the ceiling. I mean, some bad
yeah,
stuff happens, but at the end of the day, it's kabuki theater,
yeah, yeah,
and
right,
that's mostly what it is.
yeah,
So anybody that's outraged, anybody that's righteously indignant, or ever, to me, I look at that as completely a manipulative thing. That it's being done on purpose,
yeah,
and it's being done to trigger a response from a specific group of supporters. At the
yeah.
end of the
and
day,
and and the problem is that, like, as Americans, we actually are righteously indignant, right? Like, whether you're on the Trump side or not on the Trump side doesn't really matter. I
right?
don't think that it makes their righteous indignation any less valid because they don't agree with me politically. They still feel that,
Yeah,
right? Problem is the politicians don't feel it. Like
at
what you
all.
said.
At all. They get reelected at like a 90+%. It's
Yeah,
insane. It's insane when you look at how many seats are even in. Well, until recently, when you would look at how many seats were even in contention,
yeah,
the numbers are staggering. It's like, how can there be this much discontentment
yeah,
overall that people recognize and admit to, but still
yeah,
there's no fundamental change. Like the system just goes on, or the probably the right way to say that is the establishments just move on.
yeah,
Okay, I was witness to uh, a political party literally breaking their own rules in favor of specific establishment candidates over others. Okay, so I was very simple for me. That's it. I'm no longer associated with the Republican Party. I'm done. I
yeah,
severed all ties with them completely. I'm done. Okay, but what I don't understand is how so many people didn't have a problem with that.
yeah. Because it's
Okay,
their team, man.
that's your
Like,
team, and the team wanted X, Y, supposed to
yeah,
have this process for picking their quarterback, and then when a portion of this team didn't like who it looked like the quarterback was going to end up being, they just changed the rules.
yeah,
And so, where do I get my representation now?
yeah,
Okay, and then if I'm looking at the Democrat side of the spectrum, we're talking about super delegates. How anybody could think that party private party somehow represents them with the superdelegate process and the way that panned out.
Yeah.
You know, so here I am. I'm adrift, right? I'm out in the middle here someplace looking for representation, and I can't find it anywhere.
Yeah.
I can't find any either establishment not willing to even lie to their own members and break their own rules per se.
Yeah.
And so what am I giving you money? Any of you? What am I giving any of you money for? It should be the first question every person asks themselves, right? But it's not. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great to talk. We didn't talk that much about science. That's okay.
I did. Hey, I just went where seemed like you wanted to go. I have a rule that I don't even talk about politics on this show, and now I'm going to have to change that. So I am willing to have objective conversations about politics and government. Yep, I will change my rule because of you now. But hey, thanks a lot for being on the show. Appreciate everybody listening. If you get a chance, go over to YouTube and give us some likes and subscribes. We'd love to have you share our posts. Check out our website, noshitcast.com. Like and subscribe to us on iTunes and stuff, and we'll catch y'all next time. Bicycle.